Hi, this is my review of Ardennes 44, The Battle of the Bulge, published by GMT Games. So let's start with the rulebook. This is the third edition. It's about 30 odd pages. The rulebook is really well written. It's very detailed. I have found this whole series of games very straightforward to understand if you take your time. So it's definitely a rulebook that you'll need to read thoroughly before you, in my opinion, before you start playing. And I'd also say whenever you start playing for the first time, or if you have not played the game in a while, it's useful to have it in front of you at all times, and you will be referring to it a lot. Thankfully, there's a great index at the back. So, for example, nicely laid out, great examples, very well written, and takes its time to explain it to you, which is why I describe this game as a game best enjoyed when you have the time to do so. I thoroughly enjoyed reading the rules. It's one of the game systems that I've played quite a few games in this sort of the 1940s series, I would say, by GMT from this designer. If you've played the game, any of the other games in the series, you'll be familiar with a lot of the concepts. If you haven't, it doesn't matter. It's a pretty good game to start with, in my opinion, in this series of games. And there are some nuances that make this game a little bit different than the other ones, which you'd expect from a sort of a Bulge game. But yeah, overall, great job. Like I said, you will be referring to it quite significantly. At least I have been when I play through the game. You do get multiple scenarios. So this is worth mentioning because the actual core campaign game is a double map game. I've got it set up on the table. We'll have a look at that in a minute. But there are other shorter scenarios that only use one map. So shorter in the terms of the length, so number of turns, and also only using one map. So if you're a bit more limited on space, and I've played through, I've just finished another run on the campaign game, which I enjoyed thoroughly. But I've also played the shorter scenarios, and I've enjoyed those as well. And they're only using one of the maps. So if you're a bit more limited on space, you can enjoy those. And I enjoyed those as much. I mean, I would, if I've got time, or if I want to leave this game set out for a few weeks, I'll play the campaign game. But I really did enjoy the short turn scenarios as well. And you get a couple of those. Scenario 4 using both maps, scenario 5 using both maps, scenario 1. So in scenario 2 and scenario 3, one of them is 6 turns and one of them is 8 turns. And I enjoyed them. I got the game out a little while ago just to play a shorter scenario, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So yeah, and as I said, a very, very useful index which you will be using significantly. So yeah, great job on the rulebook. You also get a playbook as well, and what this has is a whole bunch of designer notes, which are great and really great to read. Helps you understand the intent of the game, the intent of the designer, as well as notes on the different editions. And then really, I will actually call out the bibliography. And it's always great to understand the reference from the designer. I personally have a few of the books that's listed here, and I think I can remember playing an earlier edition, and went and bought a load of extra books on the historical subject matter. So I thought that was great. And then you get this really, really great extended example of play. And what this does is take you through the first few turns as an example of play. Now, I would really recommend, if you want to learn the game, so you've read the rulebook, if you actually want to learn, and I don't mean learn the mechanics, because the rulebook teaches you that, but if you want to understand how the mechanics come into play, and the nuances of them, I would highly recommend you going through these first few turns, moving the counters, doing exactly what that is illustrated in this example of play. It will help you understand not just how the mechanics work, but actually how you put them into practice. And my review of Holland 44, which is another game by the same designer, using very similar mechanics to this game, I thoroughly enjoyed that, and I've done the same thing here as well. And it's, again, this is why I talk about a lot about the best, in my opinion, for me, the best way I enjoyed this game was in taking my time as a gaming experience. Not just taking my time in playing the game, but understanding the rules, going through this sequence of play, which I think, from memory, took me an evening or two, but I really enjoyed that, and it just helped me understand and at a really leisurely pace. Now, in those examples, I'm playing it solitaire, so and I think it's a good way to learn the game. Plus, you get all the reinforcement schedules and all that good stuff, and nicely put together, beautifully done with the the large showing you the maps and counters, and high quality as you'd expect from GMT. You also get a very useful player's aid. Say very useful, extremely useful player's aid. It has all the core tables that you're going to be using for combat. Actually, combat is a very straightforward mechanic in the game. You are usually using the attacker's value versus defense, and you have this odds ratio table there. Has all the summary of the column shifts. The combat can result in you having to use the firefight table, which is quite an interesting mechanic. I enjoyed that. Plus, you have all the different tables that you'll be using through the game. So, defensive artillery, fuel shortages, all the things you'd expect from the Bulge game. Bridge demolition is a thing. You have a really useful, actually, summary of the game markers, especially when you're first learning the game. I found this player's aid extremely useful. The terrain effects chart, again, very straightforward. It sort of informs you of the movement points for the hexes, and whether you get an armor shift and any notes. The one I'm going to call out on the terrain effects chart, I can remember when I first started playing the game, playing a lot of war games, I saw anything on the map with trees, normally good. Normally good for the defender. Or it's good to be in, right? The interesting one of the interesting things about this game is this wooded rough hex, where if you are attacking out of a wooded rough hex, your units, any units attacking out of it, are halved. And I think I can remember reading in the rulebook that this is very different than a forest. Though interestingly, in a forest, if you've got vehicles in the forest hex, they're also their attack value is halved. But the rough one, I can remember the first time setting this game up and actually missed that rule. So I sort of found out a couple of turns in and started the game again. It's quite interesting. But yeah, it's very concise, very well, nicely laid out as you would expect. This is really useful, and I've used this extensively throughout the sort of all the game sessions that I've done. Very, very well done. They've what I like about this is they've thought about what the player actually needs when they're playing through, and they've sort of concised it all onto this double spread player's aid, which I thought was great. So here I've got I've just started setting up the main campaign again, just to really illustrate the game, to show you what it's going to look like on your table. As you can see, the map's quite large. It is sort of two maps. I'm using two pieces of plexi, so there's a little bit of glare. Filming under sort of daylight conditions today, so not too bad. And then to the left, just off camera, I've got the order of appearance cards, which is basically the reinforcements. If I just move the camera up a little bit, I apologise for the sort of jarring nature of this, but you can just sort of see the extent of the board. Now I'm what I use for this sort of size games, and this is not it's not what I would call a monster. It's 2 maps. It's bigger than most people's sort of table maybe, but I use what I've got here is a board, like a hard like an MDF board that I lay on top of the table, and that's strong enough to hold these larger games that I play. I don't have any cats, so that helps. I do have small young children though, but thankfully the last time I played this, it survived then, and it just gives you some sort of sense of the scale of the game. But the maps, we'll have a close look at the map in a second. The map is absolutely beautiful, so let's have a look at that. So I've just zoomed in a little bit on the map just to sort of show some of the detail of the map, show some of the counters. One of the things I think the map does a really good job of is it's very clear what all the contents of all the hexes are. A beautifully graphic design illustrated for the map. The map looks gorgeous, and it's one of those games that every time I place the map out, I start putting the counters on. Just doing that is a thoroughly enjoyable part of the hobby. I love maps. I love counters. They're just beautifully done, and it looks great on the table. The actual counters themselves, I would always play this sort of style game with tweezers. The counters are nicely done. They're very clear. The contents of the counter. The counters that have armor, so tanks. But actually, I say armor. It's tanks and those type of vehicles. They have an illustration on them, which is nice. It's very easy to read. It's very easy to read the map. It's just really nicely done. Really nicely done. This isn't a game with huge stacks. For the most part, 3 counters. For the most part, in a hex, if that. There isn't a huge number of gameplay counters either. So, for example, there's a disrupted. So you'd simply place that on there. So that's a result of combat. So actually, in terms of the management of the game on the table, it's very easy. It's really nicely done. In terms of we'll have a look at now at the reinforcements, because there's another key part of the game, I would say. So I've just zoomed in on the Allied Order of Appearance card, which is basically the reinforcements for the campaign game. And I'm just going to just here they all are. And as you can see, there's quite a few counters for the reinforcements, as you would expect with a game of this historical subject matter. And thankfully, they thoughtfully give you a card which basically shows you what counters to put on and what turns they arrive on. Plus you have it's just off camera, but you have a record track as well that helps. Again, due to the historical nature of the game, Bulge game, the Allied player is going to get a lot more reinforcements than the German player, for example. But extremely useful. But it gives you some sense of the scale. I mean, this is a 23 turn number of turns of reinforcements for the Allied player if you're playing this sort of one of the longer campaign. It just gives you some sort of sense of the scale of the game. But they look great. Again, like I said, all the counters very nicely done. They punch out really well. I've clipped all mine, and then they look great. So in terms of mechanics, it's actually quite a straightforward game, and the whole series of games are quite straightforward to play. The actual moving the counters as you go from one hex to another, every counter will have a movement allowance. There are certain different types of movement. There are different costs for the hex to move into. Very straightforward. As is doing combat. Each counter has a sort of a attack value and a defense value. You compare the attack versus the defense. You work out the odds. You use any sort of shifts based on the terrain, etc. And you roll your d6 and you compare it to the table. It's very straightforward. There's a lot of nuance and there's a lot of elements of Chrome. So like I said, there's different types of movement. You have these prime movers just here to move your artillery around. You flip in artillery over when you fired them. There's a whole sort of player turn, and I'm not going to go into every detail of every single rule. And there's other videos on YouTube that do that far better than I ever could. It actually flows quite well. It's quite if you take your time, just methodically go through the turn structure, methodically moving the counters. I think in terms of brass mechanics, now making the best out of those mechanics, I think, is where the game shines, because that in itself is quite an art form. It's involving, right? And by playing through that playbook, I think it will help you understand, because this is just one section of the map. And as I showed in the earlier shot, the German player is going to be pushing up the map, and the Allied player is going to do everything they can to stop them. And there's a whole bunch of stuff they can do to try and stop them. Bridges being blown, road blocks. The Germans have the road blocks, and there's all manner of different things. There's supply and there's fuel dumps and all that. There's different entry points. You do actually most of them off camera here now. Entry points for the Allies, and the German player can try and block them if they choose, etc., etc., etc. You're taking key objectives and working out the terrain to the best of your advantage and all that good wargaming stuff. So it's a really involving game, and it's like I said, take your time. I'm going to point out 100 times in this review. Take your time and enjoy it. That's the best way to play the game. So what I love about this game, it looks great on the table. The map is amazing. The counter's very easy to read. Brilliant player aid. Everything's set up really nicely for you to really enjoy the game. I would set this up if I'm playing it solitaire over the course of a week or week and a half. Play at a leisurely pace. Take my time. Even on this setup, for example, I might try some different tactics and then try and take certain key objectives, see how that goes, put the counters back, try it a different way. That's how I enjoy playing this level of detail of historical war games. I love the straightforward nature of the mechanics, but the depth to them. This is a game, it's actually fairly straightforward to learn the mechanics, as I explained. They're fairly straightforward, but actually putting them into best practice is definitely a thing to itself. And I can remember the first time I played this game, I was moving the counters, I was rolling the dice, doing all the combat, making a right hash. Yeah, a bit of a hash of it, I'll be honest with you. And you kind of learn through the play of how best to maximise both sides to their ability playing at solitaire. And when I talk about playing at solitaire, there's no bot. You are moving all the counters and doing the combat to the best ability of the abilities of both sides. I have never had the Bulge fatigue that I know a lot of war gamers have. I will happily play a variety of different Bulge games over the course of a year. This is one of my favourites, I will be honest with you. I love all the games in this series. Check out my other review. I've reviewed Holland 44 and I reviewed Stalingrad 42. Check those reviews out as well. It helps when you come to a game when you're somewhat familiar with the mechanics. It eases you in gently. But it's a game, as I've said, I'll say again, in my opinion, best played at that sort of take your time, leisurely approach, thoroughness, understand the mechanics, enjoy the gaming experience. It is a rich piece of history. I've read multiple books now on the Bulge and the Ardennes. It's a period of history that I find fascinating. And when you play the game, I'm not going to give anything away. When you play through the game, this game for me, it helped me understand a lot of that historical subject matter and some of the decisions and nuances, I would say. I don't want to give anything away. So yeah, for me, it ticks every single box. I have, as a wargaming enthusiast, as a history enthusiast, ticks every single box. It is not a game you can play in an evening. That's probably the key thing. I even think the shorter scenarios, I don't think I've ever played them in an evening, though I do play at this leisurely pace I talked about. So you're going to have to leave it set up. But notwithstanding that, for a 2-map, it's not a monster, but for a 2-map Battle of the Bulge game, yeah, I would, like I said, I play a variety of different Bulge games. This is definitely one of my favourite. And if you've played the other games in the series from the same designer and you enjoyed them, it's a no-brainer. If you're new to the series and you're thinking which game should I get into, I think this one's a really good one because it has those shorter scenarios, 1-map scenarios. I think I'll always say be led by the history. So if you've got a keen history in the Ardennes, it is, yeah, for me it's a no-brainer. I mean, it's a great game and a great system. So yeah, high recommendation from me. And thanks for watching as ever.